With the emerging need to become environmentally conscious, several car companies have opted to do their part and are pushing for the use of electric vehicles, EVs, which are sustainable compared to regular vehicles. For today's video, we'll be discussing the impact of EVs and how they'll shape the future, for better or for worse. If you're curious to know more about today's topic, stay tuned to know more. Will electric vehicles become the boom or bane in the future? The short answer is yes. These vehicles are not only changing the future, but they're also a sustainable leap forward in making the world a better place. For too long, we've been dependent on gasoline-powered vehicles that added to the already growing problem regarding climate change, so it's only natural we're also the ones who remedy the issue. In the US, one of the biggest factors that contribute to climate pollution is transportation. According to the EPA, US greenhouse gas emissions totaled 6,558 million metric tons, 14.5 trillion pounds of carbon dioxide equivalents in 2019, which depicts a 2% increase since the 1990s. China is still the largest contributor to CO2 emissions, and reports indicate that the country now produces 10.06 metric tons of CO2, as reported by Investopedia. As we all know, air pollution can also cause several respiratory illnesses, of which one of the most popular are asthma and bronchitis, but it can also trigger several lung diseases as well. With the ongoing global health crisis that broke out last 2020, a staff scientist named Rashmi Jugalkar, who works at the Earth Justice's Toxic Exposure and Health Program, found out that a striking association between long-term exposure to harmful fine particulate matter and COVID-19 mortality in the United States. This fine particulate matter mainly comes from gasoline and diesel car engines. Reports such as these have been making rounds and are raising both health and environmental concerns. Duke University made a study about this from a few years back, wherein they found out that each gallon of gasoline purchased at the gas station carries with it up to $3.80 in health and environmental costs, and diesel that comes from in big rigs and farm equipment have it worse, with an additional $4.80 in social costs to our health and climate per gallon. Contrary to gasoline-fueled vehicles, electric vehicles are a far better option, and by a long shot. Electric vehicles operate through the use of power grids, which come from a variety of sources. But of course, Earth Justice attorneys are pushing for the majority, if not all, of the population to opt for clean, renewable energy. We can't completely wipe out the use of fossil-fueled engines, but a lot of car companies have announced their shift in manufacturing EVs, and some even started a few years back. Although EVs are only being popularized in recent years, these vehicles have been around since the mid-1990s, and even centuries before. It's difficult to pinpoint the exact date they were invented, since countries from all over the world have produced their own electric vehicles of varying degrees from different timelines. For so long, gasoline-powered cars have been the norm ever since the combustion engine came to be. But as time went on, it was evident that it had its adverse effect, especially on the environment. A report published by the BBC has stated that we're now past the tipping point where EV sales will quickly surpass sales of petrol and diesel cars. We've already seen established brand companies push for it, most famous of which is Tesla, as well as Toyota, who's also been the leading manufacturers of vehicles for decades now. Several car companies announced their shift to EV. It's been a decade since the Nissan Leaf made its debut as the first contemporary mass-produced vehicle, and Tesla's already ahead and leading by example, also due to popularity. A lot of car companies have pledged to opt for electric, with Chevrolet already pushing forth this 2021. Mercedes-Benz plans to launch its EVs by 2022, while Honda is geared for a 2023 release. From the looks of it, it's only a matter of time before society embraces the use of EVs as a whole. Like the internet during the late 80s, it was only during the 90s that the public got the better of their curiosity and succumbed to the internet. Despite the coronavirus outbreak last 2020, global sales of electric cars raced forward last year, which saw a rise of 43% to a total of 3.2 million. Despite overall car sales slumping by a fifth during the COVID-19 pandemic, as reported by the BBC, the news media also shared that by 2025, 20% of all new cars sold globally will be electric, according to the latest forecast by the investment bank UBS, and will continue to rise higher as time passes by. It's been predicted that its sales will jump to 40% by 2030 and by 2040, virtually every new car sold globally will be electric, says UBS. So how are electric or hybrid cars more effective than gasoline-fueled vehicles? As stated before, the energy used to power these vehicles makes use of electricity and as such emits lower greenhouse gas emissions than gasoline-powered cars, according to a study conducted by experts at the Union of Concerned Scientists. As far as emission rates are concerned, EVs are winning the race, but the manner of production involving them doesn't hide the fact that it produces more global warming emissions than the average gasoline vehicle. It's simply because EVs make use of lithium-ion batteries, which require lots of materials and energy to build. To keep things in perspective, an average-sized EV with an 84-mile range results in 15% more emissions compared to the cars we use today. So, is it worth using EVs more if, in the manufacturing process, it already does a lot of environmental damage? Yes. If you ask why, it's because EVs make up for their manufacturing emissions by 18 months of driving at most, which makes it a better option for gasoline cars. According to TrueCar.com, EV batteries can last 10 years before they need to be replaced under normal driving conditions, which is much longer compared to new cars. The Union of Concerned Scientists even has information to back this up, since they reported that the average EV today has the same greenhouse gas emissions as a car, getting 88 miles per gallon, which is far greater than the average new gasoline-powered car, 31 miles per gallon, or truck, 21 miles per gallon. Electric vehicles are rechargeable. We mentioned this in passing a few moments ago, but one of the main advantages of owning an EV is that it's rechargeable. Whether you do it at home or a bus terminal, this feature is most especially handy for trucks and other services, since they need not make a trip to a central depot or yard regularly. So far, the leading state that uses EVs is California, followed by Texas, Florida, and Washington. Several charging stations are being constructed to accommodate said vehicles. Research scientist Ari Weinstein favors this development, stating, "Having dependable charging that works lets me buy a plug-in hybrid without hesitating." Weinstein shared with Sarah Gerson, an Earth Justice attorney and clean energy expert. The opportunity to drive an electric car shouldn't be limited to people who own a home with a garage, explains Gerson. Workplace charging is one key element of democratizing access to electric cars, and we need to move aggressively if we're going to meet this challenge. Electric utilities have a big role to play. Electric trucks can make a big difference. Although they represent a small number in the overall carbon emissions, the shift to electric trucks is a pretty big leap towards the betterment of the environment, especially since gasoline-fueled trucks generate massive amounts of air pollution and even creates diesel death zones that lead to respiratory problems and illnesses. In California alone, gas and diesel-driven trucks make up almost 50% of transportation-related air pollution in the state. Fortunately, today, people are switching their diesel trucks with EVs, wherein 70 different types of zero-emission trucks are already in use and leading by example. Hopefully, more states will soon follow the trend. Climate change advocates have been going at it extra hard towards big companies to go electric, and thankfully, it's bearing fruit. Ambitious as they sound, they're aiming for a zero-emission society. Starting with transportation. Zero emissions simply mean that a vehicle emits no pollutants to disrupt the climate or dirty our air. Athena Matsvov, Earth Justice's associate legislative representative in Washington, D.C., has expressed their organization's interest, stating, "If we're going to have a real shot at stemming the impact of the climate crisis, we need to ditch fossil fuels, pivot to 100% clean energy, and achieve zero emissions. Making electric vehicles accessible to all people is an important step towards that goal." Earth Justice has pushed forth the Electric Vehicle Freedom Act, introduced by Representatives Andy Levine and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez last February 2020. This bill proposes establishing a network of electric charging stations alongside public roads to encourage the adoption of electric vehicles by the wider public. Martinez is inconsistent on a sustainable and breathable future, like many of his allies and several climate activists. To make it safe to breathe, we need to implement electric vehicles as fast as possible, Martinez explains. He further added, "Fortunately, as we've seen a change in administration, there's a lot of opportunity at the federal level to bring electric transportation into communities. But we must recognize that a lot of the decisions on clean transportation are local. It's city councils, it's mayors, it's state legislators, legislators that are making the vast majority of transportation decisions in this country. About Earth Justice. What's the organization about? Earth Justice is the premier nonprofit public interest environmental law organization dedicated to litigating environmental issues. They're headquartered in San Francisco and have 14 regional offices across the U.S. As stated on their website, Earth Justice uses the law to preserve a rich, sustainable, and diverse natural heritage for current and future generations. We select cases that will protect endangered species, sensitive habitats, and threatened wildlands, reduce human impacts on ecosystems, and hold accountable those who damage them. And that wraps up today's episode on whether or not electric vehicles will be the boon or bane in the future. Thanks for watching today's video. We'll see you in the next episode.